So, Erev Tov, everyone. Last week, we started a journey that began at the beginning of Genesis and took us to the end of Deuteronomy and still left us parked in the wilderness. I want to pick up on that image of journey. And let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see that well?
No.
Nothing.
No. Yeah, okay. Hold on a second. Let me try. See if I can figure out why not. How about now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I'm minimizing all of you, only so that we can see the whole screen. And today I want to sort of focus on sacred days and specifically on pilgrimage festivals. As I said, I want to stick with our motif, and we're going to see if this gizmo works. Of course it doesn't work. Okay, hold on a second, folks. Now it's my turn to have a technology problem. All right. So you know how everybody asks the question, are the holidays early this year? Are they late this year? Well, I want to sort of unravel the mystery of that so that we can find our path. Today is February the 29th, making this year a leap year. Right? And we have a leap year on our calendar because
the days aren't exactly 24 hours.
Right. And over the course of a month and a year, we have a problem that the trip that the Earth takes around the sun doesn't take 365 days. It takes roughly 365 and a quarter. And that too is not quite correct. So every 4 years, we take our 4 quarters and we add an extra day and we kind of make up the difference. And, you know, every 1,000 years or so, we have to add a little bit more of a correction. But I don't think any of us are going to have to worry about that. The Hebrew calendar, however, is not so simple. Right? I don't know how many of you follow the path of Ramadan, but if you did, you would notice that Ramadan comes earlier and earlier each successive year. And in fact, Ramadan will begin in about 10 days or so. The reason Ramadan keeps processing backwards through the calendar is that the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. Okay, a lunar month is somewhere between 29 and 30 days. In order to balance that out, the lunar calendar will have alternating months of 29 days and 30 days. Again, it's not 100% precise, but it works pretty much for a long period of time. The typical lunar year is 354 days long, which means that it is 11 days shorter, or in this case, in the case of this year, 12 days shorter than a solar calendar year. So when you overlay the two, year one, you lose 11 days. Year two, you lose 11 days. In year three, you've lost another 11 days. In the Islamic calendar, this is not a problem. But for us, it's a real problem because the pilgrimage festivals, as we're going to see, all have an agricultural aspect to their celebration, such that one of the names for Pesach in the Torah is Chag HaAviv, the festival of the spring. So what happens after 3 years or 6 years or 9 years of a lunar calendar? You are now, your Chag HaAviv, your spring holiday, has now marched all the way back and is now in the middle of winter. Which is also a problem when you get to the festival of Sukkot, which is the festival of harvest. Well, if Pesach is in the middle of winter, if the spring holiday is in the middle of winter, then the harvest will not be ready by the time you get to Sukkot. So our sages developed a fused lunar solar calendar in which, when we have a leap year, as we do this year, we don't add a day, we add a month.
Oh, I have a dog too, yeah.
All right. So, and before someone says anything, it's still not a perfect fix, because minus 11, minus 11, minus 11, plus 29 means we're still out of whack by a handful of days. So the Jewish lunar solar calendar works on a 19-year cycle in which 7 of the 19 years are leap years.
7 out of 19.
7 out of 19, all right? This is why there's great confusion oft times, because you can have 2 leap years out of 3, because it's not a neat every 3 years the way we have in the solar calendar. Every 4 years, we know there's going to be a February 29th. This requires many more mathematical computations. In the ancient world, when the temple still existed, the rabbis did not do this based on math and calculation. As the month of Shvat was ending, they would go out into the farms and into the fields, and they would look at the state of the crops, and they would they decide, oh, okay, things are growing nicely, everything will be ready in time for Passover, or nothing's grown yet, time to add an extra month to the calendar. Now, fast forward, at a certain point, doing it by eye becomes impractical, and so they come up with this system of 7 leap years in the course of a 19-year cycle. The upshot of that is some years Pesach is early, And some years Pesach is later. Some years Rosh Hashanah is early, and some years Rosh Hashanah is later. For example, this year Rosh Hashanah is at the very beginning of October.
Right.
Right? Which is why people are always asking the question, are the holidays early or late this year? A colleague of mine who clearly has way too much time on his hands figured out that if you take the earliest possible day that Rosh Hashanah can fall and the latest day that Rosh Hashanah can possibly fall, Rosh Hashanah never actually falls on the day that is absolutely in the middle between those two extreme points, proving that he has too much time on his hands. Okay. If I were to ask you when the Jewish year begins, you would say to me,
Rosh Hashanah.
you would say Rosh Hashanah, yes, and you would be right, but you'd also be wrong.
Go figure.
Right? The Jewish calendar actually has not one, but as many as four, and during the biblical period, 5 calendar years, which isn't as strange as it sounds. So think about in our own lives, we have the secular calendar year that runs from January through December. We have the academic calendar, which is basically September through June, with some time off during the summer. The synagogue has a fiscal calendar year that runs from July 1 through the end of June. Right? Businesses may have their own fiscal years that run however they run. Right? So on one level, it's not so strange that there be multiple calendar years. Rosh Hashanah was calculated working by the rabbis, working backwards through the Bible to the moment which they calculated to be the moment of creation. And so Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world. But we recently celebrated Tu B'Shvat, which is the birthday of the trees. Okay. We don't bring them little cupcakes with little candles, because candles around trees is not a good thing. But why is Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat, the birthday of the trees? Do 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 do. Anybody want to take a guess? It is completely arbitrary in many ways, but the rules of the Torah with regard to trees was that in year 3, you had to do certain things to the tree. In year 4, you had to bring the first fruits of the tree, and then you could start using it for yourself. Now, how many of you have planted trees in Israel? You have to indicate out loud because I can't see your hands.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you always plant trees on the same day of the year?
No.
No.
Of course not. It's for a baby that's born, or a simcha of some kind, or maybe it's in memorial, in memory of someone, and it's whenever during the year. Imagine you had to track when the birthday of each of those trees. Very inconvenient. And so any tree planted before Tu B'Shvat, before the 15th of the month of Shvat, was considered a year old on that day. And then 2 years old on Tu B'Shvat the next year, 3 years old, etc., etc. Making it very easy. You just have to remember which trees were planted in the last year. By the way, they do the same thing with horses in modernity. So when you hear people talk about 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, the reality is that the 1-year-old could be technically a month old or 12 months old, depending on when in the previous year it was actually born. But nobody wants to keep that kind of precise record. So 1-year-olds are 1 year old on whatever the arbitrary date happens to be. Schools kind of do the same thing, wherein you're assigned to a grade level based on when your birthday falls. But in some places, it's how old you are on September 1, other places September 30th, other places even later. And when we moved from New Jersey to Toronto, we ran afoul of this because Sarah had completed grade 1, but according to her birthday was not eligible to enter grade 2. So they required her to take a series of skill and aptitude tests to demonstrate that she was in fact ready for the 2nd grade. Even though she had passed fully and completely the 1st grade. But the calendar said otherwise. Okay, so in the Bible, we have a complicating factor, which actually would be familiar in some ways to us as well. How old is the United States?
240 some odd years. 60, let's see. 20, 48, 248. Almost.
Okay. Oh, okay. And it will celebrate its birthday on
July 4th.
July the 4th. Okay. That's not very neat on one level, but it is historically correct. More or less. In the Torah, one of the other calendar systems was based on the monarchy. So when a new king came and was crowned into his role, or I'm going to say his role, we didn't have any female monarchs really, that became day 1 of the king's year. So when the Torah, especially more so the Tanakh, I should say, in the Book of Kings talks about in the 4th month of the 1st year, or the 4th month of the 12th year of King whoever, it gave us a piece of information, but it wasn't all that helpful in some ways, unless it also told us when he was crowned king.
Mhm.
Okay. Hold that piece of information because it's going to become relevant soon. Okay. So welcome to the Jewish calendar. We are here. We're in the month of Adar. Specifically, we are actually in the month of Adar Rishon, the 1st month of Adar. And it is because when there is a leap year, Adar is the month that is doubled, because Adar is the month prior to the month in which Pesach falls. So if I'm worried about the agricultural growth, then this is where I add the extra time. Okay, and if you look at our lovely little holiday wheel, our little calendar wheel, okay, at the very top, you see Tu B'Shvat listed in the month of Shvat. And we are, as I said, in the month of Adar. And underneath where it says talking over here, there it is. The festival of Purim, which is coming up kind of quickly. And we will celebrate with great festivity on Saturday evening, March the 23rd, lest you think you can get away with even this not having a commercial. And then we'll get to Pesach a month later. Okay. Moving around our wheel, I'm going to come around to the month of Sivan, which is roughly at 5 o'clock. And you'll notice the festival of Shavuot. And then I want you to come around with me to somewhere around 8:30 on the clock, where we will get to the festival of Sukkot. And it is these three that are going to be our primary focus for this evening. They are regalim, which comes from the Hebrew word regel, which means foot, and they derive this collective title because they're pilgrimage festivals. In the book of Deuteronomy, we read, 3 times a year shall all your men appear before the Lord your God in the place that God will choose, referring presumably to the temple in Jerusalem. On the festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, they shall not appear empty-handed. Each shall bring his own gift appropriate to the blessing which the Lord your God has given you. And while the Hebrew says men, it is clear that in ancient times that this was a family expedition. Men, women, children, everybody made these pilgrimages to the shrine and then the temple in Jerusalem in order to celebrate the festival. Part of the purpose of these pilgrimage festivals was that they created an opportunity for the community to do several things. One was to affirm their communal commitment to the covenant with God. It offered them the opportunity to strengthen their identity as a people and as a religious community. And it entrenched the sanctity of Jerusalem and the place where the temple stood in the religious consciousness of the people, right? It was ultimately meant as a community building experience. And these pilgrimage festivals had a profound social and religious impact. And not only did they bring Jews from all over the land of Israel, but we see that during the Hellenistic and Roman era, once there's the beginnings of a Jewish diaspora, that Jews from all over the ancient world and around the Mediterranean would make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Not necessarily 3 times a year, but they made a significant effort to get to the temple at least annually, or for some once in their lives. If this sounds vaguely like some other pilgrimage you've heard of, It's not an accident. Part of what we read about in some of the Second Temple literature is the nature of the commercial enterprise that surrounded these festival celebrations. There's a huge industry of involved in animal husbandry, raising animals so that the pilgrims could purchase them at the animal marketplace so that they would have something to bring as an offering when they went to the temple. There was in that marketplace an area that seemed to be designated for banking to allow pilgrims who came from all over the Mediterranean to exchange currency from the foreign one to a local one. And inns and taverns would look forward to the wave of people coming to celebrate in order to bolster their income. The number of pilgrims coming on an annual basis by the end of the 1st century before the Common Era was so great that King Herod, who was the Roman appointed ruler of the by now vassal kingdom of Judea, built a huge esplanade, a courtyard that surrounded the existing temple in order to allow more people to be present for religious ceremonies within the precincts of the temple. The Haram el-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, as it's called in Arabic, that is made up of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is actually built on the foundations that Herod created to build his expanded temple. And the Kotel was one of the supporting walls from this Herodian temple era courtyard. After the great revolt against the Romans that led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, pilgrimage festivals as pilgrimages ceased to be and became either synagogue-based worship or home-based worship. But the idea of these 3 festivals was preserved with prayer and other rituals replacing animal sacrifice, and the historical themes of the festivals in many ways dominated the mind and the liturgy of the Jewish people. Okay, have I lost anyone on the side of the road yet?
Yes.
No, we're good.
No. We're good.
Okay, all right, just, remember, because of the way my screen is, I can't see you. So if you have a question, just shout it out. All right, so I want to ask, what's the difference between a holiday and a holy day?
One letter.
Larry was being smart. He said 1 letter.
And a space. And that is correct, but not what I was pushing for.
Holiday, it's a day without work for me. And a
Okay,
holy day is something related to your beliefs, your religion, whatever.
okay. So let's start in the secular world for a second. And we recently celebrated, sort of, a holiday.
President's Day.
President's Day, right? Which at some point in the past was actually celebrated as Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday. And then we should have smushed it all together as President's Day. And to celebrate President's Day, what takes place?
Work.
Sales in the stores.
Yes, President's Day, like Martin Luther King Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, I feel like I've forgotten a couple, are
Veterans
essentially now national sale days. For some people, they are a holiday in that they don't have to go into work. Students love these these days because they are a holiday. Yay, I don't have to go to school. I get to stay home and play with my friends and pretend to do my homework. Right? It is a holiday. It is a break from normal routine. And I may or may not necessarily do something that reflects the meaning and purpose for which the day was created. So think about how we celebrate those. And I think calling them holidays is probably quite correct. So what do I do on a holy day?
Well, you congregate with others.
You congregate with others, potentially, yes. That's certainly it's certainly a thing that we are known to do. But we
go
like
to
to
shul.
congregate. You might go to shul, yes. That's
And
part
you
of our congregating.
yes, and you might not do any kind of work.
Well, isn't not working a holiday thing?
Different kinds of not working, not writing and not cooking and not driving the car and
It is. I don't do ordinary stuff in part to enable me to do other stuff. So, for example, if I had to go to work, I couldn't come to shul and congregate. If I was doing my normal stuff, then I don't have the time to focus on the specialness or the sanctity of the day. I will say that this is just as an aside. The advantage of observing Shabbat, for example, is no one has asked me to help them move on a Saturday ever. Gee, I would love to help you move into that 5th floor walk up. Nothing would give me greater pleasure, but it's Shabbos. If you were doing it on Sunday, I'd be there, but heck, sorry. So in part, it is a step back from the ordinary. And what I want to explore is, so if I'm taking it as a holiday, how do I make it into a holy day? Okay, this is a quote from Michael Strassfeld, which I always found very compelling, and especially given the journey motif, he fits right in. Festivals act as lodging for travelers making their way through the year. These festival inns are special accommodations not solely for rest or retreat from the world, but also places to halt, take our bearings, and make sure we are traveling to make sure we are traveling and not going around in circles.
He's one of the writers of the Jewish Catalog.
Any thoughts on Strassfeld's description of the festival? It's intriguing because what actually happens on an annual basis, right? In fact, the holiday calendar, the holy day calendar, is circular, right? I mean, go back to the holiday circle that I showed you earlier on. Right? We start. We'll start at Pesach. We'll start at Rosh Hashanah. Wherever we start, wherever we enter the wheel, a year later we're going to be coming back to the same place. Right? So on one level, because it's a cycle, because it goes around, we actually do go in circles. So what's Strassfeld trying to get us to realize?
Well, there are times to take breaks and stop.
Yes, but take it even more. I'm asserting that the cycle, the circle of holidays repeats on an annual basis, and Strassfeld is saying, make sure you're not going in circles. So what's he hinting at, or what do I think he's hinting at? Because I may be reading into his words what I want to see, but
To think about what you're doing. It's not just doing it just to do it and on a regular basis, but to think about what you're doing.
okay, to be conscious, to be thoughtful about what you're doing. I want to suggest an image that both preserves the fact that the holiday cycle repeats and repeats and still doesn't have to be going in the same circles, right? And that is, I want to suggest the image of a spiral. A spiral goes around and goes back over where you started, but on a slightly more, hopefully, elevated level.
Yeah.
Growing up in Montreal is, I don't know if famous is the right word, but circular stairways outside of houses was the norm. Right? You lived on the second level of a house, and you came down a circular stairwell into the backyard. And in many cases, you went up and down a similar circular staircase if it was outside in front of your house to get to the level you needed to get to. So you sort of very quickly sort of intuited that, hey, I'm right above where I was. And if there's someone immediately below me, because the stairs were slotted, you could drop stuff. Kids figure this out real quickly. But it creates this awareness that I'm going in circles, but I'm also moving upwards. I'm spiraling upwards, or I'm spiraling downwards. But I'm not going in a complete circle because I don't end up exactly where I started. So part of the goal of this journey of the calendar year, even though it's going to take me back to the same places year after year after year, it is with the hope that each year I have grown in my awareness, understanding, knowledge, so that I am a little higher up in the spiral than I was the year before. Okay. I don't know if you recognize the name Yitz Greenberg.
Yes.
Okay, so Yitz Greenberg was the founder of an organization called Klal, which came from the phrase Klal Yisrael, meaning the whole people of Israel. And the purpose of his organization was to try to foster a greater degree of unity within the Jewish community at a time when he was perceiving increasing polarity. And so he set out on this mission to try to keep us in the same bandwidth, if you will. This is from his book, The Jewish Way, Living the Holidays. It's a long quote. It stretches out over 3 slides, but we'll pause along the way. The Jewish religion affirms that the life that is here and now. At the same time, Jewish tradition insists that the final goal of paradise regained is equally worthy of our loyalty and effort. Judaism is the Jewish way to get humanity from the world as it is now to the world of final perfection. To get from here to there, you need both the goal and a process to keep you going over the long haul of history. In Judaism, the holidays supply both. So, what's Greenberg suggesting as a purpose for our annualized celebration of Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, and other holidays? It's taking the same Strassfeld's idea of stops along the way, but he's translated it a little differently.
We're working towards perfection.
All right. What's another term for that, Jewishly speaking?
Tikkun olam.
Yeah, Tikkun olam is the process, and the ultimate goal is language that I don't easily cotton to, but it's the Messianic era, right? That's the perfection of the world. The Messiah comes along and poof, everything's great, except Greenberg, and why I like him is going like, yeah, don't wait around for someone else to do the heavy lifting. The whole purpose of this endeavor is for you to do the necessary work in helping to bring about that perfection, right? And so the holidays, he's telling us, they're not just stops, but they are part of how we reaffirm what the goal is and use it as a springboard to move forward. Let's read the next part of his. In the face of widespread evil and suffering, The holy days teach the central idea of redemption. They keep the idea real by restaging the great events of Jewish history that validate the hope. In their variety, the holidays incorporate rich living experiences that sustain the human capacity to hold steadfast on course. So, for Greenberg, redemption is the underlying message. So, how does redemption come out of our holiday experience?
Mhm.
Well, let's take an easy, well, sort of easy one. All right. I joked before that I gave you a commercial for Purim, but I want to talk about Purim for a second. All right. In a sentence or so, what's the arc of the story of Purim?
Saving the Jews.
Okay. And why do the Jews need saving? Why do they need redemption?
Because Haman was out there conspiring to kill us.
Okay. Haman was conspiring to kill us, right? Therefore, we needed redemption, and redemption is attained through whose efforts?
Esther.
And I'll give Mordecai a few props in there too.
Okay.
But, right? Human beings facilitate the redemption of the Jewish people at a moment of dire straits. And a month after we do Purim, we're going to get to Pesach. What's the arc of the Pesach story?
The freeing of the Jews from bondage from Egypt.
Okay.
Redemption again.
Yes, it's redemption again. And I'm not going to do every holiday, but part of one of the central ideas of the holidays is, in fact, the existence of evil, the existence of suffering, the need for redemption, and we are supposed to take our past experience and use it as a motivator towards change, towards that goal of perfection. Okay, this is the end of his quote. Sacred days give sustenance to spiritual life and a dimension of depth to physical life. The holy days provide a record of the struggle to be faithful to the covenant. While chronicling history, they distill the lessons learned along the way. And because they are popular, the holidays make the dream and the process of its realization the possession of the entire people. Okay, there's a lot in there, in that one little paragraph. Unlike those holidays that we talked about in the secular setting that have all too often become vehicles for things that are not part of their message, Greenberg asserts that the popular celebration of Jewish holidays, making it the focus and function of the people, is what keeps us true to the covenantal agreement wherein we are partners with God in the process of perfecting the world. what's the premise of his thought here, and what's the potential problem with his premise?
Mhm.
For Greenberg, at least theoretically, who's doing all of this sacred day celebration?
The
The
Jewish
people.
people.
Okay, and I'm going to look at his last words, the entire people, everybody. And that's what makes it work.
But that's
What's the-
not the reality.
That's the problem with his premise, right? It's a theoretically, that's the way the holidays are supposed to work, is I think what Greenberg's response would be. And I think he is more than aware of the fact that it's not really the way it works, even though it's what he would like it to look like. Me too, for that matter, actually, if I'm going to be completely transparent. It's also
Sure.
easier for Greenberg to make the statement because he was born and raised in an Orthodox environment and lived as an adult in a primarily Orthodox observant community. So his awareness of other Jews not doing stuff was part of what he gleaned from his work, but his lived experience was a little bit other. Okay. I want to focus on our pilgrimage festivals, come back to our journey motif. Right? And this is also from the book of Deuteronomy. And there's going to be a part of this that I hope is a little familiar when we get to it. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. What story is the text telling us so far?
Story?
Or
Yeah, I know, and I know it's not starting once upon a time, but once upon a time, after you've entered the land, if that helps. Remember, the book of Deuteronomy is, at least as a construct, is Moshe's final message to the Israelites, who are not yet in the promised land, but they're really close. And so when you enter the land means when you get where?
Into
Israel.
Israel.
You get to Israel and you possess it and you settle it and you start to grow things. What do you do with the first fruits of the soil? What do you do with that first stuff that comes up?
So it's like a gift to God for giving us the land.
Yes, it is an acknowledgement of God who gave us the land and who also enables the land to be
Ours.
fruitful and fertile. So you go to wherever it is that the chosen location is, and you shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. Right? You are stating, in some ways, the obvious. So why say it?
The more you say it, the more you'll do it.
The more you say it, the more you do it, and the more you don't let it just fall into history. Right? I acknowledge this day, I remind myself this day, this moment, that I entered the land that God promised. Right? The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. La Briout. Right? Right? The next part was going to start to sound more familiar, perhaps. You shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. That's true. Yes, well, before it was in the Haggadah, it was in the book of Deuteronomy. Right? So I know this is familiar because you've read it year after year, but think about this as the story of Pesach. And what strikes you about the story and the way it's told?
Talks about us, not you.
Okay, it's very us-centric. Okay, good. What else?
It's retelling the story, acknowledging to God the story.
Yes, it's retelling the story and acknowledging God's role in freeing us, right? Consider the following. When we read the Torah in the book of Exodus, we start this story in the book of Genesis. Okay, my father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt. That's Jacob and his family in like chapter 40 something of the book of Genesis. Right? We cross the Sea of Reeds, which is the ultimate end of our Egypt experience, somewhere in chapter 14 and 15 of the book of Exodus. Right? 20 plus chapters. Right? So when the Torah tells the story in the original, it is long. This is an incredibly terse version of the story.
It's like Cliff Notes.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Yes. All right. It captures the highlights. We went to Egypt. We got stuck in Egypt. The Egyptians were oppressive, and they made us work at hard labor. We cried out to God. God saved us. Yay, God. Right? And now that I'm living comfortably in a land flowing with milk and honey, I remember my history and I acknowledge and appreciate God. And therefore, I give a small token of appreciation to God. Okay. Now,
But this makes it very personal. Because the first, when he's recounting the story, he's talking about the whole people. But when he offers the fruits at the temple, it's me. So it makes it much more personal for me.
Excellent. And think about what the Haggadah does with that idea. You know, the Haggadah emphasizes that each and every one of us should feel as if we ourselves had left Egypt. Right? The Haggadah didn't invent that. It emerges from this, right? The other piece of it is that our ancestors were primarily, really through most of the first temple and for a bulk of the second temple period, they lived an agrarian lifestyle, which meant that every year you said this. This was the thing that you got to say in the temple, and the only thing you got to say in the temple. You brought your sacrifice, you left your sacrifice. You didn't get to talk. Right? This is an authoritative version of the story that hits the highlights of exile, oppression, crying out to God, and redemption. It is the central narrative, and it is connected to one of the personal rituals that you as an Israelite did. And the authors of the Haggadah made this a central piece of the Haggadah, even though we don't do this anymore. Right? Have any of you ever brought a basket of fruit to the Temple Mount?
No, no.
No.
Yeah, don't. It's a really bad idea. They probably won't even let you through security. So what did the rabbis do instead? Well, we don't do this ritual, but we read about it and we translate it into the idiom that works in a post-temple era. Okay. Right, and then there's the end of the section. You shall leave it before the Lord your God and bow low before the Lord your God, and you shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. Who gets to participate? Who should be included?
Everybody.
Everybody. Right? And that finds its echo in the Seder that we observe, right? Right near the beginning, we open the door, and we say, Halach ma'anya, this is the bread of poverty, this is the bread of affliction. Diachalu abatano, that our ancestors ate in Egypt. And what's the next part? Kol dichvin yeteve yechul, kol ditzrich yeteve yifsach. Let all who are hungry find a place at our table. Let all who are in need find a place to rest here. Now, some of you are a little older than me. Some of you are kind of the same age as me. In all your years of opening the door at Pesach and saying, halach ma'anya, kol ditrich. Anybody ever walk through your door?
No.
Nah.
No,
Yeah, me neither. All right. So why do we do it? And by the way, if someone did walk through our door, we would be pretty freaked out. Right. So why is the Haggadah echoing the end of this, even as we're just starting our Seder?
No.
It's marching orders.
Um,
Just in the same way that our ancestors who fulfilled their obligation to do this ritual are reminded, wonderful, you shared your bounty and you acknowledged God for the blessing that that blessings and bounty that you've gotten. Don't forget to include the Levite and the stranger, because guess what? By definition, they don't have the bounty. If the Israelite society was agrarian, that meant that you lived off the land, whether you farmed it, whether you did animal husbandry, you lived off the land. Right? What was the one thing the Levites did not get?
land.
They did not.
Yes, that's exactly right. They had some cities and they had a little bit of land, but they never got their tribal thing that says, here, you farm this, or you grow trees here, or you, right? And the stranger would not have any access to land whatsoever. They're on the margin. And it's a reminder to the Israelite then, and the Haggadah is a reminder to the Jew today to be mindful of the people who are on the margins, because they're not just going to walk through your door just because you said this beautiful formula. But that's about moving the whole process forward towards perfection. That some of the evils of our society are not, people with snidely whiplash mustaches that they're twirling. The evils are much more endemic and systemic and require great effort to overcome. Okay. Our time is running out. I have much more that I could say and wanted to say, but I'm going to just highlight a couple of quick things. One is, you'll see at the bottom of this page that I wrote the words agricultural and historic. Each of the pilgrimage festivals has an agricultural aspect to it and a historic aspect to it. Right? Pesach, as I noted earlier, was considered Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the spring, when the very first things began to ripen. And on Shavuot, you brought your first fruits, the things that just were showing the first ripening on Pesach are now ready for harvest, and you bring them to the temple, and you have to, in the temple, the Kohanim would use some of the first grains as an offering to God, as a way of allowing the new grain to be used by everybody. And then Sukkot, at the end of the growing season, was the harvest festival. Right? So you had the spring rebirth festival, you had the harvest, the beginnings of the harvest, and then you had the end of the harvest. In pre-Israelite society, there was a spring celebration of the first grain harvest, which was at the same time of the year as the birth of the first lambs. Does that tie in with anything Pesach related that might come to your mind?
The Seder plate on the lamb.
Yeah. Okay. So what's on the Seder plate that
Shank bone,
yeah, and and the shank bone comes from
lamb.
all right, and in the temple period, you didn't end up with a shank bone on your plate. You ended up with a piece of lamb on your plate because that was the offering that was brought. Right? And you brought a grain harvest celebration. Right? You don't think of it as celebratory necessarily, but think matzah, the most simple of baked things. Okay. All of this
Rabbi,
yes.
a question about the lamb. I
Sorry.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir. I grew up with the tradition that you did not eat lamb at the Seder.
Correct.
And yet a friend of ours, who's also a member of the temple, Wendy Kramer, who grew up in England, grew up with the tradition that you did have lamb for the Seder.
Okay. I
Is
don't
there
know. I will tell you that the custom of not eating lamb was a product of the fact that lamb was the thing that was brought to the temple as part of the celebration of the Passover holiday, holy day. And therefore, the rabbis basically said, we don't do things that emulate or imitate the offerings that were brought in the temple. And since the Passover, the lamb was brought as a Passover offering, that became the thing that you didn't do. Right? Where now, it would not surprise me that there are Jewish communities that have a different custom, because we wouldn't be a real Jewish community if we didn't have differences in custom and practice. But I can't say where that custom re-entered from.
Okay.
Because the much more widespread one is the one I described to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So that's the agricultural piece of it, right? And each of the pilgrimage festivals has a pre-existing agricultural aspect that's given a Jewish overlay by connecting it with God as the source of our bounty. But they're also each connected to a historic event. So Pesach celebrates liberation and redemption. Shavuot celebrates revelation and the giving of Torah. And Sukkot represents the harvest and the expression of gratitude that would have been significantly more palpable in an agrarian society. And part of what each festival does is have us try to reenact that celebration, that experience, that historical event. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. So for Pesach, if the overarching theme is redemption, it's a reminder of God's intervention in history to lead our Israelite ancestors from slavery to freedom. It celebrates God as the great liberator, not only of the Jewish people, but ultimately of humanity. And this act of divine redemption becomes the blueprint for the way Jews understand God, morality, ethics, and God's expectations for us in the world. Fast forward for a moment to Shavuot, and I got to tell you, I feel bad for Shavuot. I do. You know, I'm skipping over this just to get to Shavuot. Okay? You are cordially invited to the wedding of God and the Israelites, or in some versions, the Torah and Israel. For as important as redemption was, as important as our liberation from Exodus was, from Egypt was, it was step one. Because the whole purpose, and God says this to Moses, when you leave Egypt, come back here to this mountain. Why? So I can affirm my covenantal agreement with you and the Israelite people, and I can give you this incredible gift called the Torah. That's why I'm getting you out of Egypt. It's not, yes, being in Egypt and being slaves was horrible and terrible and shouldn't happen to anybody, shouldn't happen to my worst enemy, but poo, that's not enough. Right? Shavuot, as a commemoration of God's gift to us, which is the catalyst that creates this religious community, is ultimately more important. It's at Sinai that the purpose of our freedom, our removal from slavery, is transformed into this living, dynamic relationship with God that is an essential and unique part of Judaism that makes it portable through time and space. So why do I feel bad for Shavuot? Because Pesach, almost everybody celebrates. Right? In study after study after study, most Jews find themselves at a Pesach Seder. Whatever that content of that Seder happens to be, there is this gathering to celebrate Pesach. Fast forward past Shavuot for a second, and you get to Sukkot. And Sukkot has all of this pageantry and the sort of the magic mystery of building the sukkah and not having it fall down.
Yeah.
All right. And there's something wonderful about being in the sukkah. And Shavuot is an orphan. It is bereft of ritual and of distinctive practices. Right? The Shulchan Aruch, which is this medieval Jewish code of law, in the few paragraphs that deal with Shavuot, it talks about the adjustment of the liturgy to accommodate the necessary prayers that happen. So Pesach has all of these things on the Seder plate, and we have the Haggadah that tells the story. We've got all of this stuff that we can do to reenact and re-experience that redemptive moment. And Sukkot, we have all of the embrace of nature, and we're reminded to be grateful for the blessings that we have, and the food and everything else that is part of the bounty that we experience. And Shavuot sort of has, and even the things that we've attempted to add, right? We read the book of Ruth. That's nice. But on Sukkot, we read Kohelet, and on Pesach, we read Shir HaShirim. So in some ways, and the book of Ruth is the shortest of all of them, but it's a nice little story. And we eat dairy foods. Yay! There's not a lot of ritual. And without that ritual, it's hard to engage. The most compelling ritual of Shavuot was created probably by a group of mystics somewhere in the early Middle Ages. The Tikkun Leil Shavuot, this idea of pulling an all-nighter to study texts and then pray at sunrise works in some contexts, but it has to be in the right setting. I will say, if you ever have the opportunity to find yourself in Jerusalem on Shavuot, do yourself a favor. On the afternoon before Shavuot begins, take a nice long nap. Then go to one of these study moments. And when studying stops, make your way with everybody else to the kotel. Because what happens is, as you're walking half a shlufen down your block, you bump into a whole bunch of other people who are half a shlufen and coming out of their street. And you bump into people as you're walking, and you get onto more and more major arteries. People are just coming out of their streets and their studies. And all of a sudden, your little group of 10 is now a group of 100. And the group just keeps growing and growing, and you walk, and as you're getting close to the kotel, the sun rises over the wall. It is indescribable in its power. It's also really, really hard to replicate anywhere else. I think that is part of the reason why the rabbis try to give us a very powerful image. It's why the rabbis spoke of the moment of Sinai with either the Torah as the bride and Israel as the groom, or Israel as the bride and God as the groom. What was the hope, I think, in creating that imagery? It speaks of something that most people could understand, which was the intimate relationship that was created. And the sense of commitment and obligation that people feel towards their spouses. I think our sages were trying to help us transfer that understanding and awareness into our relationship with God. And on a micro level, to try to have us refresh that memory by reading Torah every single Shabbat. So, yeah, I'm going to say Ad Kan, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I will take any last questions before we say goodnight.
Why is the book of Ruth read on Shavuot?
An excellent question. The book of Shavuot is read, the book of Ruth is read on Shavuot for a couple of reasons. One is the backdrop of the story is is the harvest, right? And the story is about going from fullness to barrenness and then being restored to fullness. And so that's one reason. And the other is there's a legend that King David was born on the festival of Shavuot, and that his grandmother was none other than the aforementioned Ruth.
Okay.
Grandmother, great grandmother. I have to I think it's grandmother. I don't think it's so that's why Ruth, the book of Ruth, is associated with the festival of Shavuot. And I suppose I could even add the idea that Ruth it sort of became the paradigm for people joining the Jewish people. Right? It's not uncommon for people, for women who are converting, to take the name Ruth, since she is sort of the paradigm of people who accept and choose to enter the Jewish community and the Jewish world. But in some ways, Shavuot is about each of us making that choice and that affirmation that we are in fact committed to God, Torah, and the Jewish people. Any other last thoughts or questions? In that case, I'm going to wish everyone a pleasant evening and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Welcome. It is my pleasure as always. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Night.